with certain individuals, measuring something specific and seeing how it impacts them so we can have tangible, objective evidence of what's really going on here. So again, today I have Roland Pankowich on this call to be able to explain what he did, the research that he did on the EESystem technology, what he measured, and the results that he saw. First and foremost, Roland, I want to say thank you so much for being here and thank you for your time.
Dude, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the focus of the pronunciation of my last name because it's not necessarily an easy feat. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So, we had a conversation before this call about the details of what you were doing. But before we go into those details, and I'm really excited to share the results that you've been seeing, and I also think this is the beginning of something much bigger in terms of bringing more studies and more evidence to the table that's tangible with research, with people all around the world to bring this to the table. But before we get into that, can you share a brief background of who you are so people can understand who the person is that actually put this all together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so in essence, in the context of what I do for work, I do personalized wellness, and the average clientele I deal with are either professional athletes or business owners, CEOs. I call them high performance people. I mean, a pro athlete and the business owner, they're the same person. One uses their body more, one uses their brain. And the reason I like working with these people is because what they demand of themselves is a challenge. So it's helped me become better as a practitioner to understand the inner workings of how to optimize someone's performance through the lens of optimal health. Because my journey, I started in exercise, I moved to what's called holistic and functional nutrition. That wasn't enough, so I started studying functional medicine. You get deeper into that and you start realizing you can test anything and everything under the sun with the human body, but you're missing context because, I think you interviewed Robert Edward Grant, and he very nicely, succinctly put, there's a hierarchy of science, right? So we're looking at physiology, which is determined by how biology comes together, which is governed by chemistry. Ultimately, it's physics at the end of the day, right? And the world of biophysics is where I've kind of ended up understanding that the body organizes itself to manage energy. Everything's about energy, which is why the energy enhancement system was so interesting to me because you realize the difference between someone who's well and someone who's unwell is the amount of energy the body has and how it partitions that energy. But like you, I was a little skeptical. I went, so you just sit in a room in front of some TV screens and some miracle happens. So I went, well, I've worked with all these pro athletes, and because of the responsibility I have working with them, I have to prove myself. It's like when you do like multiplication or division, the teacher makes you check your work.
Yeah.
If I screw up, that could be very bad for someone who's, the captain of a hockey team, for example. So
Mm-hmm.
I've learned how to determine what the body's doing based upon measuring certain aspects of the body. And where I've kind of ended up in looking at the one system that governs almost everything is the nervous system, specifically what's called the autonomic nervous system. And people will know the terms fight or flight and rest and digest. Fundamentally, the difference between people who are healthy and the people who are unhealthy is one has adaptability in the nervous system, one does not. So my brain went, well, if the energy enhancement system is doing something truly beneficial that is a physiologic effect, I should be able to see it in the nervous system. And that's where the thought was. I became friends with Tara Galante, who owns Relax and Recharge up in Tarpon. Her and her family are amazing. They have this like everyone's welcome vibe in their place. And I said to her one time after the Dr. Sandra event there, I said, well, why don't we do a study? And I even think Dr. Sandra said, yeah, like connect with him, do something. And Tara booked 16 to 18 people, I think it was. And one day, like an assembly line, people came in, people went out. They did a 2 hour session. I measured them beforehand. I measured them after with some technology I have. And the results were really cool and really interesting.
So let's summarize something here and then go deeper into that. So to bring that all into one cohesive picture, and you just did a great job of explaining that. So awesome. You basically said, I want to measure something that we can see an impact in. Let's measure the nervous system. Let's see impacts on both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, the sympathetic nervous system is basically your fight or flight stress response, and your parasympathetic nervous system. That part is when you're relaxed and calm and where disease doesn't really flourish because your body is doing what it needs to do instead of thinking there's a bear chasing you that's going to eat you. So you basically said, let's see how it impacts the nervous nervous system. And I know the two devices that you used is something called a neural check and a polar chest strap that checks for heart rate variability. Are you able to show everybody on the screen those two things right now if you have them around you?
Um, so the neural check comes in its own little fancy label bag, but essentially what it is, there's a program that goes with both of these technologies. You take a device such as this, you clip it on the wrist, the device goes into the computer, and a program basically measures the time differences between each individual heartbeat. And the term is called heart rate variability because it's a nice way to describe it. The polar chest strap does the same thing, but it actually reads the magnetic field of the heart. So you know how people say the heart has its own nervous system or there's a brain in the heart tissue. The way we actually know that is there's a magnetic field that's generated upon heartbeats, and high frequency is parasympathetic activity, low frequency is sympathetic activity. And people have it, they say, oh, you need to be parasympathetic. You need to have access to both. What
Mm.
I see is when people are unwell, they're stuck in a sympathetic dominant state. So even though they may feel normal, their physiology is holding itself very tightly together because it's lost adaptability. When it comes to illness, in my opinion, Jason, an imbalance happens first. You can't feel an imbalance, you might see it on a test. An imbalance becomes then a symptom. And a symptom is your body going, hey, pay attention to this. There's something not right. I'm trying to make you aware of this. But the average person is not in tune with their body because they're not fully living in their body. So it becomes a full blown pathology or a disease. But this happens over the course of years.
So
The
you're saying you need both. We just need to change the ratio instead of being in predominantly sympathetic, being predominantly parasympathetic. But your sympathetic nervous system obviously has its role. That's why we have.
Exactly. If you didn't have a sympathetic nervous system, you would be a jellyfish. You would be one with a couch at all times. And if anyone's ever been burnt out, that's being thrown into hyperparasympathetic because the body's trying to signal you to be rested so you can heal. The average person with modern lifestyle, the food they eat, the stresses they experience, the chronic thoughts, and not necessarily finding time to balance themselves out, they're sympathetically dominant without being conscious of it. So their normalcy is stress. It's why when you tell someone who's highly stressed to relax, they'll only feel comfortable if they set the room on fire. Because in neurology, neurons that fire together wire together. So what I wanted to know was if someone is complaining of an illness, can I verify that their pattern is an unhealthy one? High sympathetic, low parasympathetic, which I saw a lot of. And can we do this? Can we bring a degree of, take a heavy person off of one side of the teeter-totter and bring it back into some sort of two-way relationship? When you have that, you have someone who has adaptability. When you have adaptability, you have a healthy body.
So you had a sample size in this case of about 16 people. And
Correct.
every single person did a 2-hour session once. You checked them before, you checked them after. Can you share the results? And were they all the same across the board? Were there any outliers that you saw?
Yes, so to share the results specifically would probably be an hour call in and of itself because of all the variables I took. So I have the general patterns.
Okay.
So there's a couple variables that I zoomed in on. The one with the chest strap is the true heart rate variability because it's actually measuring what's going on in the heart nervous system. So there's two measures. There's the one measurement that's called physiologic function. That's the amount of energy in the body.
Mhm.
And it goes from essentially a 1, which is perfect, to a 13, which is extremely exhausted. The other level is adaptability. How much reserve do they have? So if you want to think about it an analogy, there's a light bulb. How bright is the light bulb and how much life is left in the light bulb, right? So the brighter the bulb, the more energy, the faster the bulb burns out, the lower the adaptability. On average, I would say every person except 2 or 3 people got both a bump in energy level and a bump in adaptability in conjunction with a lowering of the resting heart rate. So all of those things to me may basically say that the person came in a certain state, it was their default. Being in the energy enhancement system, plus, let's be honest, lying down for 2 hours and breathing is very meditative. So I saw a dramatic increase in total energy state for the average person. I saw some people have an improvement in adaptability. I typically found this in the younger clientele. If they came in and they weren't necessarily as optimal as I thought they would be, they responded really quickly, which in my head lets me know that the less ill you are, the more beneficial and impactful a single session in the EE system is. and also the quicker the body is able to take that energy and repurpose it to health. I did measure some people who seemingly had some pretty chronic stuff going on, and there were two people who a 2 hour session didn't really move the needle all that much, but I saw a lowering of the resting heart rate. And the neural check gives someone a biological age in terms of the age range that the nervous system is operating at.
Mm.
Everyone reduced their average age.
Wow.
So across the board, I would say everyone received some benefit. You asked outliers. I had one woman show up with a condition called POTS. Have you ever heard of that before?
No.
POTS is a fancy way of saying when you go from being a position of horizontal lying down to standing up, your nervous system freaks out and it jumps up about 20 to 25 beats a minute.
Okay.
Her POTS-like condition totally went away.
In just that 2 hour period.
And her nervous system flipped. She was more stressed lying down, and she was more vigilant. Sorry, no, she was more vigilant lying down and more stressed standing up, which is backwards.
More
So
calm standing up, you mean?
she was more sympathetic lying down than she was standing up.
Understood. I
You
understand.
should be the other way around. You should
Yeah.
be very relaxed lying down. So when she was lying on her back, her nervous system and her heart rate was actually increased. When she stood up, she relaxed. It flipped her back to the optimal way of being, which
You
was
know,
really interesting.
I always think, what are the skeptics going to say, right? Because my job is, how do we think from everybody's perspective? And you brought up a good point. You said, let's be honest, laying down and breathing for 2 hours will help you a lot. So a skeptic can come here and say, okay, well, how do you know it wasn't just the fact that they went from their daily routine to resting? How do you know that it was the EE system? Do you have any plans in the future of how to somehow answer that question or isolate something like that, maybe with the use of animals?
I would love to. I mean, I would love to expand this study. I have other technology that we can use that actually uses bioimpedance electricity to actually model the cardiovascular tissue, the suppleness of the arteries, the cardiovascular output. So, I would love to look at what does a 2 hour session do to people, average all the data, what does a 4 hour session, but also what does a control do? So if we're going to eliminate the idea that it's lying down, let's just test people and have them lie down for 2 hours and do a before and after, and we compare the ratio of the results. The one thing for people that are skeptical, we use data that's population-based data to make our decisions about what works for us. If you look at how they crunch those numbers, the average thyroid numbers account for someone who's probably age 3 to age 93. So I'm 37. Why do I want to know what a 93-year-old's normalcy is to conflate what mine might be? So we can never get perfect data or perfect science. So everything truly technically is individual to the person. But if we get a general trend of many individuals all moving the same direction, I think it's something worth exploring.
100%. Also before this call, we spoke about the importance of self-responsibility. And you mentioned, you can't come in here and then go and eat KFC and everything's going to be fine. Can you speak about that from your perspective? Because I think that's the most important thing over here for people to understand, that number one, nothing outside of you is healing you. You're doing the healing yourself. And number two, healing is not one thing. Healing is everything. It's on all parts. So can you share your message with your experience and perspective on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. I mean, I want to thank you for setting the tone with people because I've listened to the general themes of what you've been saying, and it's very clear that self-empowerment is something that you're trying to infect everyone with, right? But in a very positive
A
way.
good infection.
Yeah, it's a good infection. It's one that your natural immunity is fantastic for. But fundamentally, people are sometimes in desperate situations, and I understand that. I have compassion for that. And something like the EE system, what I'm seeing is for the people who are self-responsible, but also more open, there seems to be a better effect. Because there is that individual aspect of, are you resistant to this or are you open to this? That alone will change realities. But if someone really wants to get better, the model I always put forth to people is the output of our health is the sum of all of the inputs. So there's a dietary input, there's a sleep input, there's an exercise input, there's a breathing input, there's a lifestyle input, there's a relationship with self input. If someone were to go for a 4 hour EE system session, or maybe even an overnight, and expect that the last 50 years of stress and trauma that their body has had to deal with is instantly going to go away, I think that's a misguided insight. I believe that there's a supercharge effect, right? So if you go into the EE system and you're not drinking high quality water,
Yeah.
a massive part of how energy it works in the body is structured water conducting electricity to generate energy. So if you're drinking tap water full of municipal water toxins and you're eating poor quality food and you're staying up late watching, movies in bed, looking at blue light, and you don't do meditation in that process, you've reduced the massive elements of everything outside that 4 hour EE system session that can heal you. So I think a huge thing with this is taking responsibility for yourself, doing whatever you can do, you're able to do, or you're willing to do in order to put forth the desire to live a healthier lifestyle. And then allow, it's not woo woo, but it's real. The placebo effect is there for a reason.
Yep.
Some people have a hard time understanding how to get well because they lose a piece of their identity. And I think when you're in there, a way to allow your body to really absorb and resonate with the energy is to surrender to the energy moving through you and will it into healing. Because our internal worlds are very powerful. If you
100%.
believe they are, if you believe.
Belief is huge. Belief
It
changes.
is.
It can create and it can destroy. Roland, I really want to say thank you.